Shabbat Shalom. This is the brother Ra'aya coming at you with another Shabbat lesson. But before I get started, as always, I'm going to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi, Bahasham, Rakah HaKodash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone who ruled and teach well, and whom I learned this truth from. In peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. Shabbat Shalom. And in this Shabbat lesson, I'm just going to go into how there's growing shortages on everything. Food shortages, diesel shortages, supply shortages, etc., etc. And we know according to the scriptures that shortages are going to come, empty shelves, and famines. 2022 has been deemed by Apostle Tahar to be the year of Yahweh Bahasham, Yahawashi, turning things up. And we can clearly see that things have turned up exponentially and continue to turn up. It's really looking like 2023 is going to be the year from hell. And it's going to be interesting to see how the situation with the diesel shortages plays out, because they say within the next 25 days that the U.S. is going to run out of diesel supplies on the East Coast. And we know that a lot of these things are being manufactured by the elites to artificially bring about these shortages, not just on diesel, but food shortages as well. Over the past couple of years, there have been hundreds of food processing plants in the United States of America and globally mysteriously getting destroyed, burnt down, hit by planes, you name it. And again, it's going to be interesting to see if once these things really hit at this stage, if they're going to continue and be that main domino knocking everything over, so to speak. But we know that ultimately, that according to the scriptures, major shortages are coming, major famines are coming, major death and destruction are coming, because we truly are living in the last seconds of these last days, the last seconds of the rulership of these heathen nations, chiefly of the biblical Edomites, or these so-called white people, before Yahawashi Hamashiach, whom the world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus Christ's second coming to save the elect of the nation of Israel, which consists of you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, as well as the Israelite foreigners who look like these heathen nations, and to make war against this kingdom of Esau's, and then usher in the kingdom of heaven, where the children of Israel are going to rule for eternity in. But I'm going to start it off with a precept, and then just get into a few articles documenting these coming shortages. And the first precept I'm going to go to, which is one I've been going into quite a lot lately, is Matthew chapter 24. I'm going to read verse 7, and it's in red letters, so it's Yahawashi speaking. He was telling his disciples of the end time signs to look for before his second coming, and the end of the age of the rulership of the heathen nations, and the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven. And as it says in Romans chapter 15, everything written aforetime was written for our learning. Those things didn't take place when he was speaking to his disciples about it then, but we're living in the times that these end times prophecies would be taking place before and during these major events. But this is Matthew chapter 24, verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. And these things are either in the process of taking place or taking place as we speak. And as it's about to say in verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. We're just in the beginning stages of it right now. It's going to get a hell of a lot worse from here on out. So let's go into a few articles I've got lined up dealing with these beginning of sorrows of Jacob's trouble. And the first article I'll be reading from is on endoftheamericandream.com, and the title reads, "The Global Food Crisis Just Got a Whole Lot Worse." It appears that the global food crisis that started in 2022 is going to go to an entirely new level in 2023. As I have been documenting on my websites, worldwide supplies of food have been getting tighter and tighter for months. Historic droughts have been crippling food production all over the northern hemisphere, much less fertilizer is being used in poorer countries because of how insanely expensive it has become, and the war in Ukraine has restricted the flow of agricultural exports out of one of the most important breadbaskets on the entire planet. Thankfully, a deal that was signed in July had allowed hundreds of ships loaded with precious grain to travel through the war zone successfully. But now that deal is completely dead, and the Russians have resumed their blockade of Ukrainian ports. Russia resumed its blockade of Ukrainian ports on Sunday, cutting off urgently needed grain exports to hungry parts of the world in what President Biden called a really outrageous act. Biden, speaking in Wilmington, Delaware, warned that global hunger could increase because of Russia's suspension of a UN-brokered deal to allow safe passage of ships carrying grain from Ukraine, one of the world's breadbaskets. And again, according to biblical prophecy, we know that global hunger is going to increase regardless. It's an inevitability. It's really outrageous, Biden said Saturday. There's no merit to what they're doing. The UN negotiated that deal, and that should be the end of it. So why did the Russians do this? Is it just because they decided to be mean? No, it is because the Ukrainians, with the help from their Western allies, more specifically the British in this case, which it's going to go into a little bit later in this article, stupidly decided to attack Russia's Black Sea fleet with a bunch of drones. Hours later, a statement by the foreign ministry in Moscow said the Russian side cannot guarantee the safety of civilian dry cargo ships participating in the Black Sea Initiative and suspends its implementation from today for an indefinite period. It said the move was in connection with the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces, which were led by British specialists, and that these actions were directed against Russian ships that ensured the functioning of the said humanitarian corridor. Moscow claimed 16 aerial and maritime drones were destroyed and that only a minesweeper had sustained damage. And now information's coming out, talking about how the British Special Forces, their intelligence services like MI6, had something to do with the Nord Stream pipelines blowing up. They had something to do with that Ukrainian bridge getting attacked in Crimea. And now, as I said in this article, they were the ones behind this drone strike on Russian civilian cargo ships, which in turn has made the Russians reinstate that blockade to not allow important grains and fertilizers to get through the Black Sea to a lot of countries out here. It just further exacerbating these food shortages, these famines that are coming. Hey, we aren't living in a time of peace. We're clearly living in a time of war and chaos. And besides this, like I said a little bit earlier in the video, a lot of these shortages are being manufactured by the elites. The diesel shortages, the food processing plants being destroyed because these elites are ready to fulfill their agendas, such as Agenda 2030, their GREATRESET, that fourth industrial revolution, their NW0, get you people desperate out here with the food shortages, chaos on the streets, martial law, pestilences out here, whether naturally occurring or man-made, as we'll say it, all that chaos, which they want to bring the order out of, order at KO, which is going to mainly be predicated upon you people accepting the charagma in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18, the MARKOFTHEBEAST, the RFID/NFC, MICROCHIPIMPLANT, and you're starting to see it get talked about more and more in the mainstream media. And on November 30th, Elon Musk is supposed to demonstrate the first human trial of the Neuralink brain implant, that charagma in the right hand or in the forehead. What did they think was going to happen? Did they actually believe that the Russians were just going to stand aside and allow the Ukrainians to sell their grain to the rest of the world after their ships had been attacked? That is not how the real world works. Since the deal was originally signed in July, over 9 million tons of grain had safely left Ukrainian ports. Now the deal is dead, and this is going to make our rapidly growing food crisis even worse. Even now, there are tens of millions of people in poor countries around the world that are on the brink of starvation. Indeed, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization reports that the ongoing war in Ukraine had brought 70 million people to the brink of starvation. In addition, the war also affected the food supply of another 345 million people. The executive director of the UN World Food Program, David Beasley, recently said, "It is incredibly troubling that 50 million of those people in 45 countries are suffering from very acute malnutrition since Russia invaded its neighbor on February 24th, Beasley said. Soaring food, fuel, and fertilizer costs have driven 70 million people closer to starvation." And this is the same David Beasley that just said that we're looking at a perfect storm on top of a perfect storm going into 2023. And if we want to do our best to avoid these things, we got to do something now before 2023. Well, hey, we're going into the month of November tomorrow, the second to last month of 2022. So do you really expect some major changes to take place over the next 2 months? And then David Beasley had also said that we're facing famines of biblical proportions. And he's not lying, because these things that are coming are biblical judgments of the Most High. As shortages intensify and food prices soar, unrest is inevitably going to erupt all over the planet. And that's also a part of biblical prophecy. And we saw before the situation took place in 2020 and 2021 that a lot of people across the planet, especially in Europe, were starting to protest against their governments because they saw that what the plans they were enacting weren't in their best interests. And now things during 2020 and 2021 had slowed down because of the lockdowns and all that. But hey, these uproars and unrests of the people all across the planet are starting to rile up again. Food is obviously going to be one of the main instigators of it. You had that devil Henry Kissinger say that if you want to control a nation, you control the oil. If you want to control the food, you control the people. That's a big motivator. And like I just said, a lot of these food shortages are being orchestrated by the elites to push forward their agendas. And then you've got people protesting the energy crisis in Europe right now. They're protesting high energy bills, high fuel prices, and all that. And it's only going to intensify as we get into this, what it's looking like to be a dark winter in 2023. And best believe unrest is coming to the United States of America as well. You've got a lot of people starting to say that we can expect blackouts due to energy shortages in the U.S. coming into this winter as well. But this is 2nd Esdras chapter 9. I'm going to start at verse 1, and I'm going to reread that last sentence. As food shortages and intensify and food prices soar, unrest is inevitably going to erupt all over the planet. He answered me then and said, "Measure thou the time diligently in itself, and when thou seest part of the signs past which I have told thee before, then shalt thou understand that it is the very same time wherein the Highest will begin to visit the world which he made, and judge these people on it for all the wickedness they've been committing. Therefore, when there shall be seen earthquakes, which are happening in diverse places, damn near daily all across the planet, and uproars of the people in the world, another end time sign, indicator, and prophecy. Then shalt thou well understand that the Most High spake of those things from the days that were before thee, even from the beginning. Hey, through these scriptures and prophecies that were written thousands of years ago, they weren't meant to take place in those times, but now we're living in the times to where these prophecies are speaking and coming to their fulfillment. For like as all that is made in the world hath a beginning and an end, and the end is manifest. And with us seeing all these end times prophecies in the process of taking place or taking place as we speak, we can clearly see that we are in the end and it's manifesting right before our very eyes. For example, just check out what has already been happening in Tunisia. Tunisians have been hit with soaring food prices and shortages of basic staples in recent weeks, threatening to turn simmering discontent in the North African country, the cradle of the Arab Spring protests, into larger turmoil. And those Arab Spring protests that took place about a decade ago at this point were over rising food prices and food insecurity. Sugar, vegetable oil, rice, and even bottled water periodically disappear from supermarkets and grocery stores. People stand in line for hours for these food essentials that have been long subsidized and are now increasingly available in rations only. And rations aren't just going to be something that's relegated to third world countries. They're coming to Europe and they're coming to the United States. And we saw a little example of it during the lockdowns of 2020 and 2021. You had empty store shelves of particular goods, and there were papers on shelves saying, please take only one or two of these items and be considerate to your neighbor. And that was then. Imagine now, as the situation deteriorates and gets worse, and these shortages gets worse, expect to see like armed guards and security at these different stores protecting the goods that are left. You've got this one YouTuber named Southern Prepper One. He does a program called Boots on the Ground, where he gets information from people all across the country, just documenting the deterioration of the United States. And some people have said at their local grocery stores and supermarkets that they're starting to see barricades get put up at the front entrances. Now, why would you need that? People in an uproar due to shortages out here, inflation, which is going to lead to hyperinflation, all that, stampeding and trying to take whatever they can, whatever's left. And we also saw some examples of that during the lockdowns of 2020 and 2021. You had people fighting in the stores for the few goods that were left. I remember seeing one video where two people got in a fight over the last case of water, and the one guy stabbed the other guy. And even now, you've got people going into these different stores and supermarkets and looting shit. Looting's at an all-time high. It's gotten so bad that some Walmarts in the country have put metal cages on packages of steaks with a sensor on it, so that if people try to lift it, that sensor's going to go off. And these are while times are still relatively good. You can go to the store and more or less get what you want. But I've talked about it in previous videos, how at my local Walmart, I remember during the lockdowns and the shortages of 2020 and 2021, and the canned good aisles were empty, Lysol, toilet paper, stuff like that. But the produce, vegetables, and fruit aisles just always seemed to be stocked full. But during my last couple of visits to my local Walmart, I've been seeing the produce aisle get emptier and emptier, like the canned goods, the toilet paper aisle, and Lysol, all that other stuff. And I'm sure a lot of you have noticed at your Walmarts as well that they're starting to shift around particular sections. Like, say, the paper towels and all this used to be in a particular section on the store. Well, they've completely gutted that and moved it to another section. What are they trying to do? It's a term at grocery stores and places like that called fronting things up, where you've got less goods of things. You'll just make sure you keep the wall full. It may only be 2 goods deep, but it still looks full. So people psychologically will think that there's no shortages, that everything's business as usual. But it's going to get to the point to where they won't be able to front things up. These store shelves are just going to get emptier and emptier as prices get higher and higher. And that's going to create a situation of desperation out here. And again, what did Henry Kissinger say? When you want to control people, you control the food. People stand in line for hours for these food essentials that have long been subsidized and are now increasingly available in rations only. When they do appear on the shelves, many people cannot afford to pay the staggering price for them. And it's already like that for a growing number of people in the United States of America. They can't afford name brands, so they got to buy off brands because they're cheaper. But as inflation going into hyperinflation continues, even the off brands are going to become expensive. You really got to play Tetris now when you go to these stores on what you want to buy, because you can't just buy anything you want out here if you're on a budget or anything like that. Here in the United States, conditions are certainly a whole lot better than they are in Tunisia, but there are several factors which could cause our situation to deteriorate significantly in the months ahead. First of all, 75% of the areas where winter wheat is grown in the U.S. are currently suffering at least some level of drought. La Nina has returned for the third consecutive winter, allowing for drier than average conditions across America's crop belt. Some farmers told Bloomberg that conditions are so dry that fertilizer is evaporating from the soil and plants are struggling to emerge from the ground. The odds are stacking up that this winter's growing season in the Midwest is going to be a bad one. The latest government data shows drought is intensifying across the western half of the U.S. As for winter wheat, nearly 75% of crop areas are in drought, the highest level in decades. I think they're saying the droughts that's hitting the western and midwestern half of the U.S. is the worst it's been in about 1,200 years. And if you look at a drought map, it started off in the west and is slowly creeping towards the east to cover the whole U.S. I know the Mississippi River, it's starting to dry up, and you've got a lot of barges that deliver essential goods are being beached because there's just not enough water for them to travel. And it's also a part of biblical prophecy that these farmers would be heavily affected and their croplands heavily affected in the United States of America. And then, on the one hand, you've got increased droughts in some parts of the country affecting crops, and then in other parts of the country, extreme flooding affecting crops getting planted. The Most High is hitting this place on every level. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 15. I'm going to start at verse 11. But I will bring them with a mighty hand and stretched out arm, speaking of the elect of the nation of Israel in the United States of America, the 1/3 being delivered from all these calamities of Jacob's trouble and ultimately getting beamed up onto the chariots, which people ignorantly refer to as so-called UFOs, to escape the nuclear destruction that's coming to this country during World War III, where this place is going to be turned into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards. And smite Egypt with plagues as before, and will destroy all the land thereof. And this isn't talking about ancient Egypt or Mizraim under the biblical Hamites or these so-called Africans. This is talking about the modern day spiritual Egypt as pursuant to Revelation 11 verse 8, the United States of America. Egypt shall mourn, and the foundation of it shall be smitten with the plague and punishment that the Most High shall bring upon it. Droughts, major flooding, crickets, locusts, grasshoppers, eating up crops. They that till the ground shall mourn, and farmers till the ground, for their seeds shall fail through the blasting and hail, and with the fearful constellation, these different calamities the Most High is bringing to this country. Again, floods, droughts, diesel shortages, because a lot of those tractors and farm equipment run off of diesel. And I did a video a couple of months ago showing that farmers were complaining about high diesel prices back then, which kept them from planting a sufficient amount of crops. It's all just a perfect storm brewing to bring about these food shortages and famines and just shortages in general. Chaos. Secondly, a potential rail strike threatens to cause severe supply chain problems all across America starting next month. Abaratazah, that gets kicked off. Let us hope that the strike does not materialize, because it would really disrupt the flow of goods across the country for as long as it lasts. Thirdly, it appears that the entire Western world may be wrestling with temporary shortages of diesel fuel in the months ahead. For much more on this, please see my recent article entitled, "A Crippling Shortage of Diesel Fuel Threatens to Devastate Western Economies in 2023, which we're going to get into that article after this article. But how does the majority of these goods get to these stores? How does regular gasoline get to these gas stations from trucks powered by diesel? And if these different companies can't afford to just keep refueling their trucks with diesel due to high prices and then just can't get it with shortages, what does that mean? Empty store shelves, empty gas stations, and whatever they do have left, the prices are going to rise. Inflation, hyperinflation. And then I was watching a video the other day on one of these news networks where a Edomite who owns a fleet of trucks that do deliveries, he said due to high diesel prices and diesel shortages that are coming, he spends about $300,000 to $400,000 a month just to fuel his trucks for deliveries, and that's clearly not sustainable. These latest issues just add to the growing list of problems that the food industry has been experiencing. According to Kraft Heinz CEO Miguel Patricio, higher prices and supply chain headaches are likely to continue to be with us for the foreseeable future. Kraft Heinz CEO Miguel Patricio says higher inflation and supply issues are coursing through the food industry, forcing companies to adopt new strategies for everything from production to promotion to packaging. And he doesn't see an end to either issue anytime soon. We've already increased the prices that we were experiencing this year, but I'm predicting that next year inflation will continue. And you've got all these major economists saying that a recession is inevitable in 2023. A lot of them are putting it at 100% certainty that the U.S. will be in a recession in the next 12 months. And some have even reassessed their estimates, saying, oh, instead of 12 months, 8 months. Some say 6 months. It could be in the next 2 to 3 months. But we do know that a recession ultimately going to be a depression, which some experts are saying is going to make the depression of 1939, the Great Depression, look like a walk on Sesame Street is coming. And then global recession is coming globally, not just to the U.S. We've already increased the prices that we were expecting this year, but I'm predicting that next year inflation will continue, and as a consequence, we will have higher rounds of price increases, Patricio said in an interview with CNN Business. But while we are dealing with significantly higher prices and occasional shortages, people in poor countries on the other side of the planet will literally be trying to figure out where to get enough food to feed their families. The UN has already warned us that multiple famines are likely in 2023, And with each passing day, the number of people living on the brink of starvation just keeps getting higher. This is a global crisis that isn't going away, and thanks to new developments in Ukraine, it just got even worse. The beginning of sorrows. And again, best believe it's coming to the United States of America, and it's going to be the worst when it gets here. You know that saying, saving the best for last? Like the Most High is saving all these horrific calamities for the saving the best for last for the United States of America, spiritual Egypt, also known as Babylon the Great in the scriptures, which is going to get the worst of these calamities. This country is ultimately going to get wiped off the face of the earth by those nuclear missiles. But before we get into that next article, let's go to 2nd Esdras chapter 16. I'm going to start at verse 17. Woe is me, who will deliver me in those days? Hey, if you're a so-called Negro, Latino, or Native American, or even an Israelite foreigner who looks like a heathen, but they've heard this word and it stirred something in their spirit, Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai is going to deliver us in those days. But how is he going to deliver us? By us doing whatever we can to diligently serve the Father and not be rebellious like the wicked of our people that don't want to come back to the Most High and follow the laws, statutes, and commandments to the best of our abilities. They still want to be a part of this world. You got Halloween tonight, and best believe there are a lot of so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans out there celebrating it right now. Hey, little do they know that major death and destruction is right around the corner. As it says in, I believe, Luke, woe to you that laugh now, for you shall cry and weep later. So, hey, I'm going to put my stock in Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, and I'm diligently doing whatever I can right now to make my calling and election sure, so I can have that protective hedge over me to be saved from these calamities of Jacob's trouble. And it says in Isaiah chapter 65, verse 13, that even though these horrific famines and death and shortages are coming, that my servants shall eat and drink, while you shall mourn, while you shall hunger and thirst. My servants shall rejoice, but ye shall lament and howl and cry for vexation of spirit. You Israelites that didn't want to take heed to the word during this time of liberty, this grace period, so you're going to get the full brunt of that judgment when Jacob's trouble really pops off. The beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars and rumors of wars. Got the war in Ukraine, the rumored war between China and Taiwan, the rumored war between Israel and Iran, which will take place, rumors of World War III, which is going to take place, nuclear war, which is going to take place, etc., etc. And the powers shall stand in fear, the beginning of evils. What shall I do when these evils shall come? Behold, famine, mentioned again, and plague, tribulation and anguish are sent as scourges for amendment, scourges for correction, scourges for punishment. Hey, to you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, children of Israel, we've had little instances of us getting kicked in our ass throughout our life. And just in 2020 and in 2021 with the lockdowns, the Most High turning up the heat on that stove, so to speak, a little bit, so that these jakes out here could be like, look at what's going on. And wait, these things that are taking place are what those guys on the street corners in the funny dresses that read from the Bible, those Hebrew Israelites have been saying. Maybe I want to take stock in what they're saying and get my life right. The Most High's even got some celebrities out here, like your Nick Cannons, your Kanye West, Yee, and Irie, how you say his name? Irie Curving, making either outright saying that so-called black people or the Jews are making allusions to it here and there. And there's celebrities that a lot of our people look up to. Kyrie Irving. They're celebrities that a lot of our people look up to. So the Most High is pleading with you jakes out here to Acknowledge that you're Israelites and come back to your power before these scourges really turn up. And it's not just going to be for amendment to get right. It's going to be for death and destruction and punishment. But as it says in verse 20, but for all these things they shall not turn from their wickedness, nor be always mindful of the scourges. A lot of you jakes are just waxing worse and worse. And I'll never forget, during the lockdowns of 2020 and 2021, at the height, a lot of brothers whose family members knew that they were in the truth were calling them, asking what's going on, which just goes to show that in the back of their mind, they know that what the brothers are saying is true, that the Bible is the truth. They were calling, asking questions. What do we do? What's going to happen next? All that. But then as things started to go back to normal, hey, they went back to normal. Hey, some of them waxed even worse. I know some brothers that said some of their family members or friends that were nervous, asking them about what was taking place back then. Once things started getting back to normal, they were slick-side scoffing. So what do you think the Most High is going to do to you when he really turns that heat all the way up? Your ass is going to get burnt, get cooked like a fucking Christmas turkey, Thanksgiving turkey. Which shit, it's looking like Thanksgiving's not going to be as happy this year either, due to turkey and chicken shortages because of this bird flu going around, and just the prices increasing for turkey and chicken. The Most High is shutting down America. A lot of people can't afford the candy for Halloween because of high prices. And now, and I noticed it on the Newsbreak app that I always bring up, that a lot of New Orleans news publications down here, across the country, are warning parents to check all the candy that their children get because they might be laced with fentanyl. The city of confusion is truly being broken down and shut up, as it says in Isaiah chapter 24, verse 21. Behold, victuals, goods, food, stuff like that, shall be so good cheap upon the earth that they shall think themselves to be in good case. But as we can clearly see, these victuals ain't being too much cheap anymore with inflation and hyperinflation coming. And I'll say, with the U.S. rising interest rates, that strengthened the U.S. dollar compared to a lot of other currencies globally recently, which is maybe made things a little bit cheaper here and there, a little respite. But what's that just going to do? That's going to further get these other nations to see that using the U.S. dollar is not in their best interest. So they're going to start diversifying their funds. You've already got more and more nations with each passing day thinking about going to the BRICS nations, Saudi Arabia included, and these nations looking at dropping the U.S. dollar. And what's that going to do? They just flood the U.S. markets back with all those U.S. dollars globally and just completely crash the value of the dollar, and then just further add to the chaos out here. Behold, victuals shall be so good cheap upon the earth that they shall think themselves to be in good case, and even then shall evils grow upon the earth, sword, famine again, and great confusion. For many of them that dwell upon the earth shall perish of famine, and the other that escape the hunger shall the sword destroy. So if you're able to escape these famines, and you're not of that elect number, you're just going to run into another calamity. Get caught up in civil unrest out here, because there will be a second civil war in the U.S. You get caught up in a racial skirmish out here, because there will be racial conflicts in the U.S., nations rising against nation. You get drafted to go fight in World War III. You get killed by these martial law troops out on the streets of America. You get sent to a FEMA camp and get tortured to death. Or ultimately, you get burned up by those nuclear missiles. And the dead shall be cast out as dung, and there shall be no man to comfort them. For the earth shall be wasted, and the city shall be cast down. There's going to be so much death and destruction and dead bodies and so few people left that it's going to become a common occurrence to just see masses of dead bodies lying around. You're going to become so numb to it that you're not going to give a second thought to these dead bodies, like you don't give a second thought to that turd that you flushed down the toilet. And what do dead bodies breed? A stink, rot, and even in diseases, pestilences, plagues. One calamity, one judgment, one prophecy plays into another one and just further exacerbates the terrors that are going to take place out here. But now I'm going to get to my second and last article on the economiccollapseblog.com. Slovakia. And the title reads, "A crippling shortage of diesel fuel threatens to devastate Western economies in 2023. In my entire lifetime, global supplies of diesel fuel have never been tighter than they are right now, and that is really bad news, because the entire economy of the Western world runs on diesel. If we suddenly had no more diesel fuel, virtually all of our trains, trucks, and ships would stop running." What would that mean? Shit, it's about to say. Needless to say, just about everything that stocks our shelves come to us via trains, which there's talks of another rail strike coming, trucks, and ships. So what? Empty store shelves, because goods aren't being delivered to them. So the fact that there's not enough diesel fuel to go around is really a big deal. Supplies have been declining for months, and at this point, diesel inventories have fallen so low that we only have a 25-day buffer remaining. And it remains to be seen how extensive these diesel shortages are going to be. But Abaratazah, this is it. This is the one that really exacerbates these shortages out here, these empty store shelves, this chaos. But again, regardless, we know that they are coming according to the scriptures. And everybody, all the alerts are going off to show that 2023 is definitely going to be one to remember, and not for good things. The U.S. is facing a diesel crunch, just as demand is surging ahead of winter, maybe that dark winter, with only 25 days of supply left, according to the Energy Information Administration. National Economic Council Director Brian Dees told Bloomberg TV that diesel inventories are unacceptably low and all options are on the table to bolster supply and reduce prices. Unfortunately, this is not just a problem here in the United States. Globally, supplies of diesel fuel have fallen to the lowest level that we have seen since 1982. The demand for diesel tends to rise as you get closer to the winter, because the molecule that makes up diesel is very similar to the molecule that you use for heating homes in the U.S. For winter fuels in Europe. Tom Kloza, Dean of U.S. Oil Analysts at Oil Price Information Services, Opus, told Newsweek. "The issue is global," said Kloza, adding that diesel inventories around the world are the lowest as they've been since 1982, and we've added about 3.4 billion people in that time. Read that last line again. The total population of the planet has nearly doubled since the early 1980s, and so we truly are in unprecedented territory. Like I said earlier, I have seen global supplies of diesel fuel. I have never seen global supplies of diesel fuel any tighter than they are at this moment. Of course, that doesn't mean that we are about to totally run out of diesel, but as supplies get tighter, we are likely to increasingly witness temporary shortages that have the potential to cause immense supply chain headaches. A shortage of diesel fuel is spreading across the United States, with one company launching an emergency delivery protocol requesting a 72-hour advance notice from clients to be able to make the delivery. Per a Bloomberg report, fuel supplier Mansfield Energy wrote in a note to its clients that conditions are rapidly devolving, and at times carriers are having to visit multiple terminals to find supply, which delays deliveries and strains local trucking capacity. Get a preset real quick, because temporary shortages are going to come from this diesel shortage that's about to take place, and they may not be temporary. Again, they may be the full Mahoney, so to speak, the real deal. which Abaratazah, this is the event that pushes this off. But regardless, we know that these severe shortages are coming according to the scriptures. This is back in 2nd Esdras, chapter 6, and read verse 22. And suddenly shall the sown places appear unsown, these croplands, because when a farmer plants his crops, what is he doing? He's sowing his field. And as we read in that article and went into some precepts, those that till the ground are mourning right now due to droughts and flooding affecting their ability to plant and cultivate, sow their land with a sufficient amount of crops, which is going to lead to what? Less of a supply at these stores. And then high diesel prices have already been keeping back farmers from planting as much crops as they want. And a diesel shortage is definitely going to affect their ability to do so. And that's going to further play into the next part. The full storehouses shall suddenly be found empty. Your Walmarts, Kroger's, Publix, Rouse's, Target, your Trader Joe's, whatever grocery stores and supermarkets and stores and generals you have in your area. With diesel shortages and high diesel prices keeping back these truckers from delivering goods, and just adverse weather events keeping back farmers from planting a sufficient amount of crops to be turned into goods to be delivered to these stores, and these food processing plants mysteriously getting destroyed, further adding headaches to the supply chain. That's just going to mean emptier and emptier storehouses, emptier shelves, less things to buy. And then on top of that, inflation, hyperinflation, and a recession making whatever's left just that much more unaffordable for a lot of people. And the trumpet shall give a sound, which when every man heareth, they shall be suddenly afraid. At that time shall friends fight one against another, like enemies. And the earth shall stand in fear with those that dwell therein. The springs of the fountains shall stand still, and in 3 hours they shall not run. And what could be one thing that would cause so-called best friends, close family members, loved ones to fight each other like bitter enemies? Food shortages, famines. Again, what did Henry Kissinger say? You control food, you control the people. You're about to start to see a very animalistic nature of these people out here, because when your stomach's touching your back and you're watching your loved ones, the people you care about, starve, hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. That's also talked about in the scriptures. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 15, verse 19. A man shall have no pity upon his neighbor, and at that time shall friends fight one against another like enemies, but shall destroy their houses with the sword. And the modern day sword, especially in the United States of America, is what? The gun. And what do we see during 2020 and 2021 due to the lockdowns and the aftermath of the George Floyd riots? A bunch of new gun owners, first-time gun owners in the United States of America, and they didn't just buy those guns to put them on display or look at them in a pretty box. Them guns are going to be used. People are going to be using a whole host of other weapons in these times as well. Whatever they can get their hands on. Hammers, knives, literal swords, chains, brass knuckles, machetes, Molotov cocktails, you name it. But shall destroy their houses with the sword and spoil their goods because of the lack of bread. The full storehouses suddenly being found empty. Food shortages, famines, and for great tribulation, all these other calamities taking place during Jacob's trouble. In a desperate attempt to alleviate the pressure, 2 tankers that were loaded with diesel and jet fuel that were headed for Europe have been turned back around. Meanwhile, the scarcity of diesel has prompted traders to start diverting cargoes with the fuel that were originally bound for Europe, Reuters reported earlier this month. Tanker tracking data showed that at least 2 tankers with some 90,000 tons of diesel and jet fuel that were initially bound for Europe were diverted toward the U.S. East Coast. This may help us a bit, but it is not good news at all for the Europeans. In fact, Some areas of Europe have already started to experience very serious shortages of diesel fuel. Unfortunately, things are not likely to improve much anytime soon. In recent years, politicians in the United States and Europe have made life really difficult for refiners. As a result, the number of refineries has actually been shrinking, and nobody has really wanted to build any new ones. Now we get to experience the consequences of their very foolish policies. Remember, a lot of these instances taking place are being orchestrated artificially by the elites to bring that ordo ab chaos, that order out of chaos. At this point, we are being told that the only way to reduce demand for diesel is to have a significant slowdown in freight movements and manufacturing activity. Stabilizing then rebuilding inventories to more comfortable levels will require a significant slowdown in freight movements and manufacturing activity. There are early indications manufacturing and freight activity peaked in the third quarter of 2022. If confirmed, that would take some of the pressure off distillate inventories, but a deeper and more prolonged slowdown in the United States and or in Europe and Asia will be needed to boost inventories significantly. Rebalancing diesel supply will likely require a further rise in interest rates and tighter financial conditions in the United States and other major economies to reduce fuel consumption to more sustainable levels. In other words, it's going to take a recession and or a depression in order to fix this crisis. Ouch. We should have never allowed things to get this bad. Over the past decade, we should have been building a lot more refining capacity, but our politicians didn't want that, and so now we all get to pay the price. And thanks to the war in Ukraine, supplies from Russia that could help alleviate this nightmare are not going to be available, so there will be shortages. Also, it is likely that diesel prices will go a lot higher than they are right now. Hey, $7, $8, $9, $10 for a gallon of gas ain't looking so far-fetched right now. Also, it is likely that diesel prices will go a lot higher than they are right now. Needless to say, that is going to add even more fuel to our ongoing inflation crisis, because just about everything we buy has to be transported, and the full storehouses shall suddenly be found empty. This is yet another reason why our standard of living is going to continue to go down at a frightening pace in the months ahead. We truly have got a colossal mess on our hands, and it's going to be with us for quite some time to come. And remember, this is just the beginning of sorrows. It's going to get a hell of a lot worse from here on out. So that's it with this Shabbat lesson. And with this Shabbat lesson, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. As we can clearly see, we're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babol, Abad Babol, Abad Babol, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.